Now we'll move towards the Q&A portion of the event. And if possible, just raise your hand and please, when we pick on you, please say your name, your year, where you're from, and stand up and then ask your question. So yeah, are there any questions?
Hi, Mr. Yang. My name is Janina Shalabi. I'm covering this event for the Stanford Daily, and I want to first and foremost thank you for coming to speak with us today, for taking the time to speak with us. I wanted to ask, in light of Trump's victory, which many attribute to third-party vote splitting, how would you respond to people who lay the blame for Trump's victory there?
That's interesting. I don't see how you could make that case based on the numbers, where Trump won all 7 of the contested swing states. And I don't think if you were to add all of the third-party votes in any of those 7 swing states, they actually are anywhere near the margin of victory. And maybe there's one of the 7 where if you added all the third-party votes up, that they'd be the margin of victory. So like on the facts, that doesn't make sense, that to blame third-party voting. Someone have to take a look at all the numbers, but that narrative doesn't actually square with the actual facts and results. To me, one of the laziest things about this era is that we're at a point in American life where 50% of Americans self-identify as independents, which is about twice as many as identify with either Democrats or Republicans, and that percentage is going up and up. If you look at young people, for example, your demo, it's more like 65% consider themselves independent or nonpartisan, and don't think that either party speaks for you. And so if you look at those numbers, really what's happening is that you have an enormous diversity of points of view that are being forced into an artificial two-party system that at this point is way behind the times.
Any question, anyone? Yeah.
Hi, Mr. Yang. Thank you for being here. My name is Stephen Wan. I'm a freshman from Sydney, Australia. I was curious if you think proportional representation is a viable means to dismantle the current two-party system, and if so, how do you see that happening practically?
Well, Stephen, I'm so glad you asked that, because Australia is way ahead of the US in this regards. And there was a major New York Times story just 2 weeks ago about how proportional representation would be a dramatic improvement. There's an act in Congress that right now has 5 or 6 co-sponsors called the Fair Representation Act that would move the US from single-member districts that naturally tend to lead towards 2 parties, and have there be, for example, 5 representatives from a single district that would lead to a multi-party system. And the New York Times story, which I'd urge you all to check out, suggests that there are 6 natural parties in the US right now that are getting shoehorned into 2. And I think that's about right. So there is a real bill in Congress called the Fair Representation Act that would move us towards a multi-member districts and a multi-party system. And that is our best way out of this mess. And Australia has blazed the trail by adopting ranked choice voting in many of its races. If we had ranked choice voting in the US, things would be dramatically better. And I would suggest to all of you Stanford students, if Australia can do it, why can the US not?
Hello, my name is...
By the way, for the earlier questioner, ranked choice voting or the equivalent would enable diversity of points of view, and then people could vote however they wanted without fear of being a spoiler.
Hello, my name is
part of that is in my TED talk, by the way, but anyway. Sorry, go ahead, Harper.
Hello, my name is Harvey Long. I'm from New York City. I'm a sophomore. So obviously the 2020 presidential race and the 2022 New York City mayor race both were like super competitive and super crowded. I'm curious what rhetorical or like just campaign techniques you use to try to like set yourself apart from the other candidates. And why do you think Mayor Eric Adams was able to sell his vision of the city of how he wants New York to be to voters in 2022?
Hey, Harvey, what part of New York?
Well, I'm not like from the city, but I'm like
No, don't worry, man. I was born in Schenectady and went to school in Westchester, so I was very much like a like New York metro area, shall we say. But then I moved here when I was 21 and have lived here ever since, and now I'm in now it's been quite a while. The presidential race was such an interesting journey where our enemy was being ignored and getting swept off the debate stage. So my team had some jokes, which were that I was the Grim Reaper of presidential candidates because anytime I passed someone, they dropped out. the next, and the joke was, it's all fun and games until Andrew Yang passes you in the polls, and then after that, curtains. So that was difficult and arduous, but it was about trying to draw people into my vision of alleviating poverty, talking about things that I thought we should be, focused on, like AI was coming. And it was wonderful because we ended up, and some of you probably are in this group. I mean, that campaign raised $40 million from almost 500,000 everyday Americans who donated their $10, $20, $30. And I would see people everywhere I went, waitress at a diner, maid at a hotel. Like everyone wanted to. I won the Iowa Youth Straw Poll. I'm the first candidate who won that, who didn't win the actual race. So if you cut off voting at around age 18, I would have been president. And then, and some of you probably resemble that because you might have been in high school at that time. So the presidential race was lovely. The New York mayoral race, it was COVID, it was winter, and people weren't out and about and wearing a mask. Eric Adams ran on a crime message in a time when crime was the #1 issue. And as an ex-cop, he had like a trustworthiness on that message that it would be very, very hard for, let's say, like an entrepreneur like myself to match, even though I was endorsed by his old union, the police captains union, which I thought should have been a bigger deal, honestly, because it's like, hey, these guys hung out with him for years and like they don't seem that excited. But no, that I was also endorsed by the firefighters, which I was very proud of. But in a crime in a crime race, it's hard to beat the cop. And so, and I talked to people, afterwards who concluded that, like that was the message of the time. But it was a positive experience, and that I learned a lot, met a lot of wonderful people.
Hi, my name's Arya. I'm a sophomore. And my question is about the earlier bill you were talking about. So what do you think would lead a lot of people in Congress to vote for a bill that might compromise their own positions in power?
Oh yeah, that's the $1 trillion question, isn't it? You could say the same thing about stock trading and the a ban thereon, or term limits. So my bright idea on this is to help people do the right thing by saying, for example, term limits, but current members are exempt. So only after you guys all die do the term limits kick in. Fair Representation Act, you might be able to do the same thing. It's like Fair Representation Act, but it kicks in 20 years from now, after all of you have retired, though. In this day and age, they're hoping to be there 20 years later. My honest feeling as to how some of these things would be adopted is if you had a positive, independent political movement that swept the country, got governors elected, senators elected, and then they showed up and said, look, guys, moving to a multi-party system will actually help you, the legislators. And in this hypothetical, unfortunately, I think we're going to get there because of some very, very gnarly events. And by gnarly events, I mean we're in a process that's not unique, by the way, where political violence is going to pick up. So there are a couple of books on this that are depressing but accurate. One is called The Next Civil War by Stephen Marsh. The other is called it's by a political scientist named Barbara Walter, and I think it's called like How Civil Wars Start or something along those lines. So the America is a declining democracy, and in declining democracies, some patterns emerge. Something like a healthcare CEO getting shot on the street is something that might happen. Judicial assassinations are quite normal in a disintegrating democracy. So one of the spurs, I believe, to moving towards the Fair Representation Act and a multi-party system is that some people are going to be killed because of the polarization and the nastiness. And if you think, I mean, I bet a lot of you don't think that's fanciful, but I can tell you that Congress has gone from an open environment where people walked around to all the doors are shut and it's high security. And there are many members, trust me on this, who are in fear for their physical safety. And it's not unwarranted. It's because they get death threats, you know? And so like some of them are looking around and saying, can I get security? And security, it turns out, is very, very costly. I don't know if you've looked into this at all. I mean, I unfortunately have looked into it. Though, you know, I'm happy to say, I mean, you know, it's like, so I mean, I'm sharing, like, I did get death threats on the campaign trail, but there's, but not beyond like the normal level. like there's a normal level of death threats now. I'm discouraging you all from running for office. I know it's terrible because like some of you are like, I'm gonna run for office, and it's like, oh crap, Yang said that you get threatened. But I believe that those are going to be some of the catalysts to eventual reform. God, this is like did this get dark? I'm sorry about that.
Hi, Mr. Yang. Thanks for coming here. I'm Victoria. I'm a Stanford junior from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I actually worked on Michael Lai's supervisor campaign, so we're big fans. Yeah, I have a quick question. What are your thoughts on emerging movements that are trying to build factions on both sides? I'm thinking specifically about the abundance agenda led by people like Ezra Klein, who are making the case for institutional reform to make it easier to build housing, clean energy, transportation, but building it within the Republican Party and Democratic Party as factions.
Yeah, why we're polarized by Ezra Klein had a profound impact on me. I cite it heavily in my my last book. I love the abundance agenda. I'm friends with both Ezra and Derek Thompson and Michael Lai and Misha Chellam, all the people that are working on these things. And so I support them. I've tried to be helpful. I'm someone who thinks that, and this is something I had a discussion with Ezra. I was like, Ezra, have you read your own book? Like, if you read your book, what it says is you need to get off the two-party system. You know, like, I mean, you know, it's but the thing that drives me crazy is that you have the equivalent of billions of dollars in like a political media industrial complex that says like, oh, two-party system makes sense. Two-party system makes sense. And it doesn't make any sense. Like, you know, if you just put on the face of it, 340 million people, two parties, doesn't make any sense. You look at other democracies around the world, we are an anomaly in having two parties. And by the way, you can read a book on this. It's called The Two-Party Doom Loop by a political scientist named Lee Drutman. The two-party system is busted. And I am really, really grateful to folks who are trying to make things better within the system, like Ezra and Derek and Misha and Michael Lai. and I'll support them. I mean, you probably saw, like, you know, I tried to support Michael Lai, and it breaks my heart that he didn't win because it was like, what, like a couple hundred votes? It was crazy. Where were the rest of you when Michael Lai was up? No, but some of you could have voted. I mean, you know, I don't know who else was in that district. So like I'm like a both and guy, where it's like like the abundance agenda, love it. And anywhere it can have a positive impact, let's max it out. But if you ask me, it's like, hey, is the Democratic Party going to like magically get its act together and then magically win, let's say, for example, the US Senate, and then like do all these things? Like, it's not, you know, and one of the reasons it's not, aside from the math, and you can, like, you know, look various things up, it's that corporate interests have invested very, very heavily in making sure that neither of the major parties really wants to mess with anything important. And if you want an exhibit for that, I will give you the state of California, where the Democrats have a supermajority in the state legislature. And Gavin Newsom, when he ran for governor, said single payer healthcare. And then he got into office and was like, I was just kidding. You know, like, and what happened was the health insurance companies went to the Dems and were like, you know, like, no one even held a vote on this. And then they said, you got it. And it died. So you can have, you know, different debates about like the merits of single payer healthcare. But like the corporate interests only need to buy two parties right now, and they bought them both. So there's nothing huge that's going to happen. The crazy thing to me is that alleviating poverty would actually help the corporate interests, and they still don't want to do it. It's like the poor in the United States have so little political importance, like it breaks my heart. And one of the things I was happiest about that then got undone. So I started a lobbying organization in DC called Humanity Forward, with $10 million of Jack Dorsey's money. And what we do is we try and alleviate poverty. So we go to members of Congress and say, hey, poor children, they make everyone sad. You should try and make them less poor. And then the members of Congress are like, who do you lobby for? What is this meeting? But the Congress actually cut child poverty in the United States in half in 2021. I don't know. Raise your hand if you knew that we cut child poverty in half in 2021. If you don't know about it, it's fine, because we let it go back to its previous level again in 2022, because we decided spending to $200 billion on poor kids was a loser. Despite the fact that 130 economists signed a letter saying we should definitely keep doing this, like the best thing we've ever done. And when that happened, by the way, I lobbied 100 members of Congress for that enhanced child tax credit, and I slept better thinking like I helped 3 million kids get out of poverty. I mean, like I felt pretty fucking good about myself, honestly. It's like, you know, I truly was the magical Asian man from the future trying to give everyone money, and I gave them I got them some fucking money. And so, but then it got undone, because poor don't matter in this system, and like, you know, and I would try to see if there's going to be any protests or anything, and there's nothing. So I'm lobbying for a revival of the enhanced child tax credit, and there's a chance it happens under even this administration, because some of the Republicans like the sound of it.
Hello, my name is Justin. I'm a frosh. I wanted to ask, you alluded a lot today to organizational ineptitude and inaction within the Democratic Party. And so I wonder, in the Forward Party, are you trying to build like an upgraded version of what the Democratic Party could and should be, or are there actually some like underlying ideological differences?
I was around Joe Biden a lot 4 years ago. I endorsed him in 2020. I did not think he was going to run again in 2024. I was like, you know, and so when that happened, I was like, yo, wait a minute. Like this seems like a really bad plan. And so I backed a guy named Dean Phillips, who challenged Joe Biden. And seeing the Democratic Party excommunicate Dean Phillips and prop up Joe Biden through the first half of last year was one of the more stunning things I'd ever seen. and I will say, like, you can look up the tape. I was just like, guys, this is a terrible plan. Like, and then when Joe had his bad debate, I was one of the people behind a PAC called Pass the Torch. That every day I'd go on the news being like, yeah, Joe Biden should pass the torch, et cetera, et cetera. The reason I raise this is that the Democratic Party has become highly subject to whoever the current leader of the party is, and then the consultants that work for them. So what happened was Joe Biden was surrounded by a dozen people who were all getting paid by the Democratic Party. And if you ask them, hey, like, should Joe Biden be running again? They'd all shrug and say, sure. And then if you were to present them facts saying, like, really, he's got like historically low approval rates. He's, going to be 82 years old. Like, he's, they'd be like, and so when you ask about Forward Party, a lot of what differentiates us is that we're very, very grassrootsy. The state parties are very independent. And it's, I think some of you will appreciate this. It's decentralized decision making versus centralized top-down decision making. We're not very top-down, we're very bottom-up. In large part because if you're the mayor of like, let's say Fort Collins, Colorado, who's one of our mayors, she's Forward Party, left the Democratic Party, by the way. And then her constituents ask her, what does Forward Party mean? And she says, what it means is I just have to listen to what you guys want. Like, I have no one telling me what to do. And we think that's actually a better form of leadership. What kind of ideology is that? You be the judge. We're actually non-ideological. We're almost purely pragmatic and solutions oriented.
Hello, Mr. Yang. My name is William Montgomery. I'm a freshman from Walnut Creek, California. I wanted to ask, a question in a few parts. What would you describe as the Forward Party's chief, policy objectives? Which of these would you say is most important? And how optimistic are you for progress on these various objectives in the absence of reforms like, ranked choice voting and other things?
Oh, thanks. The Forward Party's primary mission is to make government that's actually responsive to popular will and have policies that reflect our preferences. And this is one of the mistakes I made when I ran for president, is that I imagined if 65% of us wanted something like universal basic income, we would get universal basic income. And it turns out I was wrong. Turns out that 85% of us can want to reform the campaign finance system, doesn't matter. 80% of us can be for some reasonable firearm regulation, doesn't matter. 75% of us can be for term limits, doesn't matter. It turns out that what most of us want does not matter. And that there's like a kind of a bill of goods version faux democracy that's being peddled to us. I'm going to use some numbers. What is the approval rating of US Congress as we're here together this afternoon?
It's about 10%.
Yeah, it's about 10%. It's a little higher, maybe 15%. What is the re-election rate for incumbent members of Congress?
90 plus.
94%. So you have a system where 90% of the districts are foreordained conclusions in terms of certainly the party that's going to win. And the only way you can lose is if you get primaried from within your own party. And the only way that would happen is if the party bosses in DC get mad at you. So you have a system that is completely unresponsive to popular will. And the question is how to change that. And that's Forward's mission. In terms of my optimism, I actually am shockingly optimistic about this, in large part because the system's so polarized and locked up that you don't need a massive lever to change everything. And so here's a thought experiment. How many US senators would need to be in a third party in order to significantly change the political landscape?
3 or 4.
Yeah, 3 or 4. And technically, if you look at it right now, there might be 1 or 2 independent senators and then 1 or 2 that are borderline. I'm going to point out Lisa Murkowski now hails from a state that doesn't have primaries, voted to impeach Trump, isn't up for re-election for another 4 years, and has openly said, like, I'm not wedded to being a Republican. There's a guy named Dan Osborne who ran for Senate as an independent in Nebraska that put such a scare into the Republican incumbent that they had to send think it was 12 or 13 million into Nebraska, which is ruby red, to try and defend. And there are more and more independents that are looking at running in various races, some of whom, frankly, I'm in touch with. So if you look at all of the trends, you wind up leading to a movement from outside the two-party system that grows. Can it get 3 Senate seats in the next 6 years? Yeah, I think it can.
Back.
Hi, my name is Rebecca. I'm a junior. Thank you again for your time. My question is, earlier you touched on like eroding democracy. I was curious to know what you think American citizens can do to alleviate democratic backsliding.
So I was with a US senator who I like a great deal. He's a great guy. And he was asked the same kind of question in the same sort of setting. And he said something that made me mad. He said, vote. And I'm not saying you shouldn't vote. I think you should vote. But you should also know that the system has made it so that your vote is going to be irrelevant in like 90% of the cases. Like they've figured it out. And so what I think American citizens should do is say, look, our system right now is crumbling around us, not because everyone's evil or malignant. It's because the design is obviously really, really poor. And what we need is a redesign. And that doesn't need to be as aggressive as it sounds. If you just remember nonpartisan primaries, ranked choice voting, and multi-member districts, those 3 things would set us free. You can also throw campaign finance reform in there, because that would be like a natural outgrowth. So I guess I'm asking you all to be a little bit nerdier about like democracy reforms, because right now we're playing in a broken system, and saying play harder is not smart. The smart thing to do is say, okay, like, why is the system not working? What can we do to improve it?
Hi, I'm Jasper. I'm a freshman from New York City. So if you're saying that, we're in a broken democracy that's only getting worse, and eventually that's going to give way to systemic reform, like ranked choice voting, what's sort of going to be the breaking point, and when will we be able to tell the situation's improving?
Well, I do want to level with you all and say that some friends of mine spent about $100 million on 8 ranked choice voting initiatives around the country in November. And I believe 1 out of the 8 of them won. And so that's not a great percentage, as you can imagine. I've been very saddened by Trump's return, in part because it augurs what I think is going to be a real dark period in American life. I think the institutional disintegration speeds up. And so I'm someone who likes data, and there is a social scientist named Peter Turchin, who studied America's integration and disintegration. And so his argument is that we've been disintegrating since approximately 1980, according to a number of variables. And one of them is something like, income inequality, but it also has things like average height, visits to national monuments, in like respect for various institutions. And according to his model, and you can look him up, it's Peter Turchin, we are in for a turbulent 10 years or so. And that after those 10 years will be something called exhaustion. And this is something that happens in fracturing societies, which we are one, honestly. And so post-exhaustion, these reforms, I think, will be more front and center. But it's going to take a lot of people working very, very hard with a lot of resources to try and push them forward. I mean, my friend spent $100 million, and 1 for 8. So maybe we should have spent like 500 million, or whatever it is. Even after this turbulent period, it's not like all of the good people are going to get together and say, well, obviously we should move towards, proportional representation. It's going to take a popular movement. It's why I'm talking to you all, because believe it or not, you all are in my honest opinion, potentially crucial figures in making this thing happen, because this thing is not going to happen in 2025, probably not going to happen in 2026, probably not going to happen in 2027. You know, it's going to happen when you all are out in the world, you know, making things happen personally and professionally. And then you might even remember this conversation from, you know, early 2025 and be like, oh, you know, now that I'm a baller or even in your pre-baller era, like right now, whatever. You know, it's going to take a lot of people pulling together to make it happen, because nothing happens by itself. By the way, the things that will happen by themselves in American life are not the good things. Like the reflexive movement is towards mud. Right. Hey guys, in all seriousness, you all are awesome. Your futures will be bright. Let's make others bright as well. Thank you all. Have a great night tonight.